Hello, everyone. So now we are going to discuss the psychosocial theory of development by Erikson. This theory of development is coming from the psychoanalytic perspective of Sigmund Freud. It's just that Erikson has a little argument about the crisis that is experienced by the person, particularly as to what it is causing. According to the psychosexual theory of development, which is by Sigmund Freud, the psychological crises are coming from sexual urges, while according to Erikson, the psychological crisis doesn't come from these sexual urges, but it comes from the social interaction of the person. He is actually saying that the social experiences and the environmental influences of the person during her younger age affects the current well-being of the person. So today, we are going to discuss the stages of psychosocial theory of development, its dilemma, its malignancy and maladaptation, and the appropriate adaptation of these stages of development. So let us see. Okay? Now, Erikson has 8 stages of development which each have crisis which needs to be resolved by the person. Okay? Ang sabi niya dito, these conflicts are negative and positive. But Erikson is saying that the person shouldn't lean too much to the positive side nor to the negative side. But the person has to learn when to adopt the positive and the negative. For example, on the first stage of development, which is infancy, the psychological crisis here is trust versus mistrust. According to Erikson, it cannot be that the baby or the infant should be too trusting, while it cannot be that he will be too mistrusting. So therefore, there has to be the concept of when to trust and when to mistrust. Okay? That's the appropriate resolution to the crisis. Having balance, adopting each of the behaviors being explained in the crisis. Now, there are some people who are going to adopt mostly the positive. At itong mga tao na ito, sila yung tinatawag natin na magkakaroon noong maladaptation. Okay? Maladaptation is the concept. Maladaptation is the concept whereby the person is adopting too much positive things. Okay? While malignancy will be the concept when the person adopted much of the negative side of the crisis. So halimbawa, sa first stage of development, kung naging too trusting siya at halos hindi lahat ng tao ay pinagkakatiwalaan niya, ang nangyari dun sa stage of development na yun ay nagkaroon siya ng maladaptation. Pero kung too mistrusting naman siya at halos wala na siyang pinagkakatiwalaan, nagkaroon naman itong tao na ito ng tinatawag na malignancy. Okay? So yun yung concept ni Erikson. Now let's go to the first stage of development. During infancy, the crisis is trust versus mistrust. And the main thing that has to be developed here ay yung appropriate feeding. It's actually the same as the concept of Sigmund Freud that it is important that feeding, appropriate feeding, when to wean. Meaning, kailan aawatin yung bata sa pagdede niya is also important during this stage of development. It's just that there has to be an appropriate TLC. What's TLC? That's tender loving care from the primary caregiver. Meaning, when the child cries, signaling na nagugutom yung bata, there should be a caregiver who will pay attention to the child and will bring the needed milk para magkaroon ng trust. Okay? Pero, hindi po pwede na sa tuwing iiyak naman yung bata, painom ka kaagad or padede ka kaagad ng padede. It could also develop too much trusting. Ang point dito ni Erikson, there has to be an ample amount of when to trust and when to mistrust. Okay? Ngayon naman, madedevelop naman yung mistrust kung ang baby ay when there is hostility coming from the caregiver, there will be mistrust coming from the baby. So, ito yung conflict na dapat ditong i-resolve. Dapat alam niya kung kanino lang siya magtatrust at alam niya kung kanino lang siya magmimistrust. Kasi may mga infants na lahat sinasamahan. That's also dangerous. Baka makidnap yun, no? Or pag tumanda siya, it will be a different concept eh. He will be trusting a lot of people and he will not be very cautious about it. So, dapat yung winning, tama, ibig sabihin, tama yung ginawang pag-awat, tama kung kailan dapat na magbigay ng feeding doon sa bata because it will affect the future of the child. Now, the next stage of development is the next crisis in the stage of development is autonomy versus shame and doubt. And the stage of development is during 2 to 3 years. Ito na yung autonomy versus shame and doubt. Also similar with the concept of Sigmund Freud during the anal stage. Same age din ito eh. Sabi ni Freud doon sa anal stage, di ba? This is the first point of independence. Remember, autonomy means independence. Shame and doubt would mean that he will not want to do it on his own because he will have the feeling that what he will do is not right. So meaning, pag sinabing autonomy, sense of independence ito. At ito rin ay nakukuha, kapareho ng konsepto ni Freud, sabi ni Erikson, during toilet training. It's just that, according to Freud, the primary caregiver should be the father during this stage of development. Okay? So, toilet training din yung autonomy versus shame and doubt. Okay? Why is it that it is very important that the child would learn to be independent? If the child would not learn to be independent, he will not develop initiative. Mahihirapan tayo sa next stage of development. Why? Because if the child will not want to do things independently, it will be very difficult for him to develop initiative or kusang palo na gugustuhin nung bata na siya yung gumawa ng sarili niya, nang magvo-volunteer siya. Yun yung tinatawag natin na initiative. Okay? During this stage of development, during autonomy versus shame and doubt, it is also important to give encouragement even if it's only 2 to 3 years old, naintindihan na nila yon. You encourage them na, okay, you can do it on your own. Ang problema kasi kung minsan, aside from during toilet training, may mga parents na who are overly protective. Kapag syempre, toddler ito eh, lumalakad-lakad na sila. You have to allow the child to explore with guidance. Okay? There are some parents who doesn't even want their kids to be walking on their own doon sa garden. Magiging concern yun ng shame and doubt. You may allow them, but that not too much allowance. Allow them with guidance so that they can explore things on their own and they would have that sense of independence. Okay? Now, the next stage is during 3 to 5 years. That's the preschool year. During this preschool year, it's the point that the child is developing initiative versus guilt. Remember again, kapag hindi na-develop si autonomy, mahihirapan tayo sa initiative. Kapag walang autonomy, sigurado may shame and doubt. At ang bata who is shaming and doubting, meaning he is not sure if he can do it, will have guilt development. Ano yung guilt na yon? Anong ibig sabihin nun? Because he might feel that he is not sure. Because he is not sure, he wouldn't want to do it. And he'd feel guilty that meron siyang feeling na magkakamali siya at magkakamali siya. Kaya hindi niya sisimulan yung isang bagay. So, according to Erikson, during the period of initiative versus guilt, the immediate family members are very, very important. Bakit sila yung important? Kasi ito yung period of exploration. And as the child explore things on their own, they are going to do little things which may not be as good as what we have expected, but as immediate relatives of these kids, we have the responsibility to develop initiative. Papaano yon? Makikita nyo yung bata na magdo-drawing yan at scribbling lang yung mga drawing. Tapos makikita ninyo na siguro it's not as aesthetic as what you know or what you wanted to be, pero sasabihin nung baby sa iyo, nung bata, maganda ba, mommy? And of course, your answer should be encouragement so that he will want to do it again. And wanting to do it again would develop initiative. Importante dito yung affirmation coming from the family members. If you are not going to affirm, then the child will develop guilt. And because he developed guilt, he will not want to do it anymore. Okay? That's initiative versus guilt. Again, appreciation, affirmation. Affirmation would mean saying that he did the right thing is very, very important. If you are watching commercials, no, natatandaan ko yung mga nido yata ito. Ang nido kasi dinidiscuss talaga nila in their commercial itong psychosocial theory of development. If you have noticed the kid, yung naglaro siya sa putikan, tapos nung umuwi siya sa kanila, maputik na maputik siya, pero nag-dialogue siya sa nanay niya. Pero sabi niya, see ma, I got stinky, I got dirty, but see, I've learned. So ito yung allowing them to explore things on their own. You also remember, I remember the commercial of Zia and Marian Rivera, yung hinayaan niya na magbunot ng parang, hindi ko alam kung ano yung binunot na yon doon sa ano, parang it's a root crop. At nung binunot yon ni Zia, Marian encouraged Zia very much at inaffirm niya yung anak niya. It's a form of encouraging the child and it will form eventually something about initiative. And once there is initiative, there will be industry. Okay? Industry going to the stage of development which is the school age, and that's 6 to 11 years old during the elementary years. So bakit kaya may mga bata na hindi mo na kinakailangang pagsabihan pa na mag-aral, pero kusang palo na mag-aaral sila? I don't know if there are if you have kapatid or nephews or nieces na kapag tinitignan ninyo, wala namang nagsasabi sa kanila na mag-aral on their own, but they are doing it on their own. That is the development of initiative, which eventually became industry. Because industry would mean working hard. Okay? Working hard. While if industry and initiative was not developed, there will be inferiority. Inferiority may go worse as inferiority complex. Remember, Erikson is also saying the feeling of being inferior sometimes is okay. Anong ibig sabihin nun? There are times that if you feel that that's not your prowess, you can stay at the background and feel inferior because other people knows it better than you. But it's different from inferiority complex. Inferiority complex, according to Erikson, is the concept whereby all of the people around you are better than you, and you cannot do better than others. That's inferiority complex. And that can be developed during this stage of development if no encouragement was given during the previous years, if no affirmation was given during the previous years. But at the opposite side naman, kapag too much encouragement and too much affirmation, even if the affirmation is not anymore legit, pwede namang masobrahan ng industry yung bata, leading dun sa tinatawag natin na superiority complex. So kaya nga sabi ni Erikson, dapat balanse para hindi magkaroon ng malignancy at maladaptation. And during the adolescent period, the adolescent stage, that's 12 to 18 years old, the conflict now is identity versus role confusion. Why? Because the important relationship that we have here are those relationship with friends, with peer groups, social relations. So ano ang nangyayari during this adolescent period? Kaya siya tinawag na identity versus role confusion. It means that knowing who you are, knowing what you want, versus being confused as to what you want and as to what role are you going to play. Anong ibig sabihin nun ng what role are you going to play? Ibig sabihin nun, hindi mo alam kung ano talaga yung gusto mo. Nako-confuse ka between what your peer groups opted you to do and what your talents, what your interests are telling about you. So magkaibang bagay yon. Kung minsan ang talent mo talaga ito, ang interest mo talaga ito, pero yung mga kaibigan mo, ito yung gustong kuhanin eh. So nagkakaroon ka ng confusion at nawawala yung identity. But during this stage of development, sinasabi dito that adolescence has to be strong enough to fight against confusion and to build his own identity. So kinakailangan pa rin dito ng strong parental support. Why? Although the influence of the peer group is very dominant during this stage of development, there has to be still guidance coming from the parents so that role confusion will not happen. And at the same time, the strength of the adolescence has to come from within so that he will be able to realize what he truly wants. So ito yung identity versus role confusion. Now, the next stage of development is during young adulthood, and that is intimacy versus isolation. Intimacy would mean liking. Intimacy is not just physical, no? Intimacy, if you're gonna look into the meaning of intimacy or being intimate with another person, would mean liking another person. So this can happen even with friendship. Okay? Intimacy means liking. If you like your friend, you can get intimate with them by sharing your secrets, sharing your thoughts, sharing your idea. But at the same time, intimacy may also mean with the opposite sex. Kasi during this stage of development, young adulthood, ang concern na rin naman natin dito talaga ay relationships. Not just relationship with friends, but at the same time, relationship with the opposite sex. So ito yung decision making, yung sinasabi, intimacy, being drawn to people, or isolating yourself. Isolation would mean wanting only to be alone. There are two concepts here, separating yourself from other people to the extreme point whereby you get to be a loner, or desiring not to get intimate relationship with the opposite sex. So medyo magkahiwalay na konsepto yon, but it can happen both in this stage of development during young adulthood. Intimacy versus isolation. Okay? And after that, we go to the middle adulthood. Kapag settled ka na, you have a family, for some, alam mo na talaga kung ano yung gusto mo, nagdesisyon ka na, you have friends with you, or you have your husband, you have your children during the middle adulthood. The next conflict that you're gonna have here is generativity versus stagnation. I-explain nating mabuti kung anong ibig sabihin ng generativity. Pag sinabi nating generativity, being drawn to others. Ibig sabihin, your concern will not just be coming from what you want and what you desire, but you concern also what others need. So ito na yung tinatawag natin na sacrificing as parents, sacrificing at work, or giving something to others. Kasi during this middle adulthood, ito dapat yung point of time na unti-unti na nabibuild mo na yung achievements mo at nawawala na yung tinatawag na stagnation. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng stagnation? Stagnation means stagnant. So, ibig sabihin nun, all things drawing into you. Done versus generativity whereby things are drawing for others. Itong stagnation, towards you lang lahat. Ikaw pa rin yung nagmamatter, ikaw yung importante, ang drama mo is you are doing it for yourself, pero sa generativity, I do this for my family, I do this for others, and I would like to serve for the common good of the people. Yung, or common good of the community, nandito na yung public service. Yun yung generativity na tinatawag natin. There are some people who gets to be inclined much on generativity, kaya nakakalimutan naman na ng sobra ang sarili, no? Puro offering na lang sa ibang tao. There are some naman who doesn't want to give even a little because things are drawn just towards the self. Yun yung generativity versus stagnation. And the last stage of crisis is the integrity versus despair happening during late adulthood. Integrity would mean having the feeling that you are fulfilled and that you have done all the things that you want really to happen in your life versus despair. Despair would be wanting to go back to your life and changing it. And people with who are developing despair are afraid of death because they feel that they still have to accomplish things at hindi pa sapat yung mga nagawa nila. May mga pinagsisisihan sila. That's having despair versus having integrity whereby you believe that you've been fulfilled in your life. It is in this stage of development that you are now reflecting to all the things that you have encountered during your younger years. So that's integrity versus despair. So these are the 8 stages of psychosocial theory of development by Erikson. Now, for those who will take the LET examination, mako-confuse kayo dun sa mga ibang items dito sa psychosocial theory of development. Pero ang lagi ninyong tatandaan para hindi kayo ma-confuse kapag doon sa questionnaire sinabi, a grade 5 student, tapos ang tanong ay psychosocial theory of development, you shouldn't be confused. May cue ka kasi dun kaagad. Masyadong ang madali yun kung tutuusin kasi nagbigay na ng clue. Elementary. Anong crisis ba meron ng elementary? Nandito sa 6 to 11 years, ang elementary age, alam mo dapat agad na ang sagot ay industry versus inferiority. Kahit ano pa yung nakalagay doon kasi meron ngang 6 to 11 years, merong elementary years. O pag sinabi, during adolescence, the person is, what kind of crisis is developed? Alam mo na kaagad kung ano yung crisis doon. Kasi, adolescence daw. 12 to 18 years yon. So, nandun ka kaagad sa identity versus role confusion. So, there are cues. Alamin mo lang kung ano yung mga yon. Okay? So, again, thank you so much. So, I hope you've learned something.